Malcolm Turnbull tried today to hose down a rebellion in the Liberal Party that could destroy him. It's a rebellion against the Prime Minister's plan to consider bringing back a kind of carbon tax. Now, this started yesterday when Energy and Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg announced a review that would look into making coal-fired electricity generators pay a penalty for extra emissions, with the costs passed on to you.
Well, the review is explicit about looking at sector-by-sector approaches, and given that the electricity sector is about 1/3 of the total emissions across the economy, it's only appropriate to see if we've got the best mechanisms in place. Now, a number of organisations have recommended an emissions intensity scheme, but again, this review has a long way to go.
Senator Cory Bernardi is one of at least 10 Liberals who cannot believe this is happening.
We fought and won an election on this. Why are we reopening it now? The only thing it's going to do is cause division. It might make us lauded by the Greens and the Labor Party and, you know, the rent seekers. But this, I think, is one of the dumbest things I've heard in politics in recent times.
But Turnbull today suggested this was a beat-up. There will be no carbon tax under a government he leads.
I have never supported a carbon tax. There are many distinguished members of the coalition parties who have supported a carbon tax over the past. I've never done. The review of our climate policies, which will be undertaken next year, has been part of the coalition's policy for many years, long before I was Prime Minister.
But that spin won't have reassured Turnbull's colleagues. Make no mistake, this is shaping up as a crisis that could end his leadership just like it ended it, and on the same issue when he was opposition leader. That was back in 2009 when Turnbull lost the Liberal leadership because he insisted on backing a similar emissions trading scheme, even though it wouldn't do a thing to stop global warming. Here is Turnbull back then.
I will not lead a party that is not as committed to effective action on climate change as I am.
We must retain our credibility of taking action on climate change. We cannot be seen as a party of climate sceptics, of do-nothings on climate change.
But of course, the man who beat him then for the leadership, Tony Abbott, did win an election by campaigning against Labor's carbon tax. Now, today, I asked Abbott about Turnbull's review, and here is what he said. I'm sure the last thing ministers want to do is reopen questions that were settled for our side back in 2009. We're against the carbon tax, we're against an emissions trading scheme, we're against anything that's a carbon tax or an ETS by stealth. We are the party of lower power prices and should let Labor be the party that artificially increases prices under green pressure. Now that is drawing a line in the sand. Now sure, you just heard Turnbull rule out bringing back a carbon tax.
I have never supported a carbon tax.
But that's just playing games with words. The government is considering a kind of tax. It's just calling it something else.
A number of organisations have recommended an emissions intensity scheme.
So what is this emissions intensity scheme? Well, it sets coal-fired power stations, in this case, a limit on the carbon dioxide they can emit. Anything more, they must pay. Now, yes, they won't pay a tax to the government. Turnbull's idea is to make them pay foreigners instead for carbon permits. But from your point of view, what is the difference? You still pay more for electricity. However Turnbull tries to spin it, this is a form of carbon tax. And if he does not rule it out fast, he's in strife.